Okay, welcome to Chapter 6. Now we're going to talk about the overview of the editing concepts. And we've talked about a lot of these editing concepts in the previous videos, but there's a few things that I want you just to reinforce. Number one, keep in mind that you're downloading data from the Kansas City server, the national database, and you're putting it on your local database. And that you do so by using the queries and running a query against the national database. Now then, the next thing you do is you run against the local database a query to be able to populate your selected set. Now we're going to be working in this selected set, and in the previous video I showed you how to go through and filter your selected set. I'm going to go ahead and minimize the Explorer panel. Now we've got all of these records filtered to, whatever we happen to need. But the thing I want to show you is that it's key that whatever you do in NASIS, remember NASIS is a read-only database. In order to edit this data, you have to literally check it out. And in order to check out data, you have to be in the group. Now, we have permissions set up by both the NASIS site and then also the group that's in that NASIS site. So all of this data is owned by the site MO5 Denver. And the group that owns this is 5-SAL Salina, Kansas. And the people who have permissions to edit this data are in this group. So that's how this works, is you have to be in the group in order to edit the data. Now, in order to edit the data, you have to come up here and you have to check out the data. Right now, it's read-only. When I click on this and I go to check it out, and keep in mind I'm working on the NASIS 6.3 beta database, so that's the reason why you're seeing me check out all this data. So it's now marked as E, the row is checked out, and it's made editable. Now, what is a checkout? A checkout basically you're going up to the national server and you're placing a lock on this data so that nobody else can edit this data. You've got the lock on this data. And so you now have the permissions to make any edits to this. After you've made your edits, you then come in here and you upload all changes to the national database. The other is here up on the NASIS menu option. And this is where you go in and you upload all of your edits. Keep in mind NASIS is a live database. And when you make that edit and you move off of that record, that is then stored in the local database. So there is no literal save because it's already saved once you move from that record. What you then have to do is upload your changes to the national database. So now that it's uploaded, you've got that information stored up on the national database, and then I can then query that same information and retrieve your edits. However, you still have it checked out until you come in here and check in the selected trees. And then once again, you can do a check-in all. Check-in all checks in everything that you've got checked out in your database. Under the table editor, you have the check-in, and you can check in the selected trees here, or you can use the icon on your toolbar to check in here. And then once you do a check-in, it then comes in here, marks all of those for check-in, removes the status. You'll notice that your status messages tells you that all of these records have now been checked in. So that is the overview of how this editing process works. You have to query the national database. You have to bring it into your local database. You have to query your local database and bring it into your selected set. Then when you've identified what you're going to literally edit, you then check that record out. And assuming you've got your name in that group, then you have permissions to check it out. And if not, then it's going to tell you that you don't have edit permissions and that you can't check this record out. So once you're done with your edits, remember, once you move from that record, you then store that information into your local database, that edit, And then when you finished your edits, you then upload your changes to the national database. And then the last step is to check in your data. And the last step that should be ingrained in everybody's usage, at the end of the day, you do come in here and you do a check-in all. And that's extremely important that you do a check-in all whenever you leave the office. NASIS is designed as a database tool, a user interface that uses one single local database, but multiple users can come in here and log in on these machines and log into NASIS and use NASIS on your machine. So you have a multi-user single database system. And in doing so, if you check out and leave any information checked out in your local database, when you leave at night, if you choose not to come into the office the next morning, but your coworker wants to use your computer to operate and edit in NASIS, when they log into NASIS, NASIS is going to find that you've got a record checked out in the local database, and that database will not allow anyone else to check out data. That means that NASIS cannot be used to edit data by another user. So it's imperative that you always check in at night, because there's always that situation where you may not come back in the next morning and somebody might want to use your computer to have 2 sessions of NASIS running. So bear that in mind, please. So we're going to discuss a few other items since I've got a few more minutes, got about 4 more minutes on this video. I've already discussed how you filter your data. I've already discussed how you've checked out your data. And let's go into going back to looking at some of this information. I'm going to check this back out. So I'm going to click over here to do a checkout. And I'm going to move over to the component table because I want to show you some of the features about editing. Now remember, in the previous one I showed you that you can come in here and do a Control plus and it opens up your child records. So that's one of the nice things about this. The other thing is, keep in mind I had left my filter on, and if you'd paid attention, you would have seen that I only had Cretes in my component table. And down here on the lower left hand side is my Crete. My component name is Crete, or my component name is Gary. And I can come in here and I can literally remove any of these filters or add any of these filters that I wish. I'm going to click on this. I removed my filters, and if I came back over here, you would see that I've got all of my components in here. Now I want to talk about some of these super scripts that you're seeing in this screen. The first one is the C, and the C means that this field has been calculated. The M means that this field has been manually entered. So you got a lot of calculated fields and manually entered fields. And then as I scroll across, you'll notice you've got some P, and P means it was prior converted. This is data that was converted over from historical data and has not been edited, has not been modified yet. So you've got a local runoff class here of very high, which is what it has always been. Now we don't know what we're talking about as far as which soil, so I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to freeze this column, and then I'm going to scroll back over to where we were at. And so now you see that these climbs, some of these have very high rating, and then somebody came in here and manually entered medium on this one. We have the calculated fields and we have an empty field. Now why is this field empty? This field has not been touched since NASIS 4. So this came over as a field basically from the old 3SD days, and up until NASIS 4 we then had basically this tells me this has not been touched. Prior converted means that it's converted from NASIS 4 data. So you now see that we've got the M and the C and the P, M being a manual entry, C being a calculated entry, P being a prior converted, and if there is no record whatsoever in that particular field, then that means that it has not been touched at all for quite some time. So that gives you a good roundup of basic editing functions how to go in there, how to query your national database, query your local database, go into your selected set, check out your data, and then what are the implications of editing the data, and what are some of these scripts that you're seeing and what they mean. So that ends this video, and we'll continue on in part 2.